and welcome to another deep dive. AI ethics is a topic that's been coming up more and more lately, and for good reason. And, for this deep dive, one listener sent in a paper titled A Value-Based Approach to AI Ethics: Accountability, Transparency, Explainability, and Usability to dive into. So,
It's like a good one.
it is. It's pretty dense, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
But it's packed with insights that I think are going to help us understand how we can make AI work for society, not against it. It's not just some abstract philosophy. It's about real-world implications.
You're exactly right. I mean, we're already seeing AI being used in so many areas of our lives.
Right.
From healthcare to finance to, even just like recommending what to watch on Netflix.
Oh, for sure. And the thing is, as AI gets even more powerful, these ethical questions are only going to become more urgent, right? So let's get into it. The paper breaks down ethical AI into four main values: accountability, transparency, explainability, and usability. Kind of a mouthful, but super important, right?
Yeah, they really lay the groundwork for thinking about this stuff.
So, accountability first. I was really struck by how the paper emphasizes that it's not just about holding the creators of AI systems responsible, but also the people and organizations that actually use them.
Yeah, that's a really key distinction.
So, for example, could we actually see companies being held liable for, say, a hiring algorithm that's shown to be biased against certain groups of people?
Potentially, yeah. The paper argues that accountability requires a clear chain of responsibility, like who built the AI, who decided to use it, and who's monitoring its impact. And maybe even more importantly, do individuals who are impacted by the AI's decisions have any way to appeal them?
It's like, can you argue with the algorithm?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a concept called algorithmic contestability, and it's starting to gain some traction in legal circles.
Algorithmic contestability. Okay, I'm going to need you to break that down for me and for our listeners, of course.
Sure. So it's basically the idea that if an algorithm makes a decision about you, like whether you get a loan or even something as serious as parole, you should have the right to challenge that decision.
Interesting. But how would that even work in practice? And how do you balance that with protecting, the algorithm itself? Like, you don't want companies just revealing their secret sauce, right?
Right. There are definitely challenges. And that's something policymakers and ethicists are grappling with right now. Figuring out how to make those processes transparent without, like you said, giving away proprietary information. And then there's the question of, just practicality. Can you actually scale something like that to handle a huge volume of appeals?
So it's more than just build ethical AI, it's
Yeah.
build an ethical system around AI, right?
Exactly, yeah. And that kind of leads into the next value, transparency. The paper uses the example of predictive policing AI, which has been pretty controversial.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that. That's where AI is used to predict where crimes are going to happen, right? And the worry is it can end up targeting certain neighborhoods unfairly.
Exactly. And the paper argues that one way to address those concerns is through what they call radical transparency. Basically, making the data that's used to train these systems public, being open about how the algorithms actually work, and having regular independent audits to check for bias.
So no more black boxes, basically.
Ideally, no.
Mhm.
But, even with full transparency, there's still the question of, can you actually understand what you're seeing?
Good point, because even if the code is public, most people don't know how to read code.
Right, and that's why transparency is just one piece of the puzzle. It's about creating a system where multiple stakeholders have the ability to examine and critique these systems.
And hold the creators accountable.
Absolutely, and to make sure those algorithms are actually working the way they're supposed to.
So accountability through transparency. Got it. Okay. Starting to see how these values build on each other.
It's all connected. And then there's explainability, which is, okay, we can see how the AI works, but can we understand why it's making certain decisions, especially when the stakes are high?
Right, because seeing the code is one thing, understanding what it means is another.
Yeah, like the paper uses the example of AI in medical diagnosis, which is kind of a scary thought.
Oh, tell me about it. What if the AI recommends surgery, but the doctor can't explain why?
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of why explainability is so important. It's not just about trusting the AI. It's about doctors and patients feeling confident in those AI-driven insights. The paper talks about these systems needing to provide clear explanations for their recommendations, ideally in plain language that anyone can understand.
So basically, AI needs to learn to speak human.
That's a great way to put it.
Sure.
And it's where I think usability comes in, which is the final value the paper highlights.
Right, because what good is an AI system if nobody can figure out how to actually use it?
Exactly. The paper argues that ethical AI has to be user-friendly, intuitive, accessible to everyone, regardless of their tech skills.
Makes sense. Like, think about those personal finance apps that use AI to help people manage their money.
Oh yeah, good example. If you're going to trust an AI with your finances, it better be clear and easy to use.
And hopefully not make any expensive mistakes.
Right. So the paper suggests things like having natural language processing so you can talk to it like a human, personalized interfaces, and adaptable communication styles.
Mm.
Making it feel more like a helpful tool than a mysterious black box.
So we've got accountability, transparency, explainability, and usability. That's a pretty tall order for people building AI, huh?
It is, but it's also a really important roadmap for building a future where AI actually benefits humanity. I mean, that's what this is all about, right?
Yeah.
Understanding these complex issues so we can make informed choices about the technology that's shaping our world.
100%.
And it's interesting how intertwined all four of these values really are. We've been talking about them one by one, but in reality, they all work together.
Yeah, it's like they're all pieces of the same puzzle. If even one piece is missing, the whole thing falls apart.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important for everyone to be aware of these issues, not just the folks building the AI systems. We as users have a role to play too.
Speaking of real-world examples, the paper talks about how algorithmic contestability would actually work in practice. Like, it's not just about having the right to appeal a decision, but also about understanding how to do it.
Yeah, and that's a great point. It's not enough to just say, hey, I don't agree with this decision.
Mhm.
You need to be able to explain why you disagree, and that requires a certain level of understanding of how the algorithm works.
Which brings us back to transparency, right? Like, if I apply for a loan and an AI rejects me, shouldn't I at least be able to see what factors it considered in making that decision?
I mean, in a perfect world, yes. But like we were saying earlier, there are often trade-offs between transparency and things like privacy or intellectual property.
Yeah.
So it's tricky.
It makes you wonder about the role of education in all of this, too. If we want people to be able to challenge AI decisions, don't we need to give them at least a basic understanding of how these systems work?
Absolutely. Yeah. We need more AI literacy for sure. And not just technical understanding, but also critical thinking skills. Being able to spot potential biases and really think through the ethical implications.
This whole conversation is really making me think. It's not just a tech challenge, it's a societal one. We're talking about fundamental questions of fairness and accountability.
That's exactly it. And what it means to live in a world that's increasingly being shaped by algorithms.
And it's happening already. I bet most people don't even realize how much AI they encounter on a daily basis.
Oh, definitely. Think about all those personalized recommendations you get on shopping sites or streaming services. That's AI.
Oh, right. And what about those chatbots you run into on customer service websites? It's kind of wild when you stop and think about it.
It is. And don't forget about social media. The algorithms that decide what shows up in your feed. That's AI too, and it has a huge impact on how we see the world.
It's almost like we're living in a choose-your-own-adventure book, but the AI is picking the pages for us.
That's a great analogy. And it highlights why transparency and accountability are so crucial in those systems. Because if we don't know how those choices are being made, how can we make sure they're fair?
It's kind of overwhelming when you think about it. AI is already so powerful, and it's only going to get more so. Honestly, it feels like we're always playing catch-up, ethically speaking. Like, by the time we figure out how to address one issue, AI will have already moved on to something even more complicated.
I think that's a valid concern. The pace of innovation can be really daunting. But, I also think we're starting to see a shift. There's definitely more awareness of these issues now, both within the tech industry and among the public.
Yeah, at least papers like the one we're talking about today are out there. It's a good sign that people are trying to think through these issues and come up with solutions.
It is.
Yeah.
And the more we talk about it, the more we educate ourselves and each other, the better prepared we'll be to deal with these challenges.
What strikes me is that this whole discussion really boils down to the idea that ethical AI isn't just a technical issue, it's a human one.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's about our values, about our priorities as a society, about what kind of future we want to create.
Right. Because technology is just a tool, and it's up to us to decide how we use it.
And if we're going to create a world where AI benefits everyone, then we need to start by embedding those ethical values into the very fabric of these technologies.
And that starts with conversations like this one, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Asking the tough questions, demanding better from the people building these powerful tools, and being aware of how AI is already impacting our lives.
Okay, so our listener is now thoroughly informed on all these challenges. What can they actually do to help shape this future of ethical AI we're talking about?
They've already taken a huge step just by diving into this research with us. Knowledge is power.
That's true, but what about beyond reading and learning? What are some concrete actions people can take?
Well, for one thing, don't be afraid to ask questions. If you see a company using AI in a way that seems shady or just doesn't sit right with you, speak up. Demand more transparency. You have a voice. Use it.
So be an informed consumer, vote with your wallet, all that.
Exactly. And remember, AI isn't this big, scary thing that we have no control over. It's a tool, it's built by people, and we have a say in how it's developed and used.
Right. We're not powerless in all of this.
Not at all. And another thing you can do is support organizations that are pushing for ethical AI. There are tons of groups out there doing amazing work, from research institutions to advocacy groups to even government agencies.
That's good to hear. It's nice to know there are people out there working on this stuff.
Oh, there are a lot of us. And don't underestimate the power of just talking about these issues with your friends, family, colleagues. The more we bring these conversations into the mainstream, the more likely we are to see real change.
It's about creating a culture of awareness and critical thinking around AI, not just blindly accepting it, but really engaging with it in a thoughtful way.
Absolutely. And here's a final thought-provoking question to leave our listener with, inspired by the paper's conclusion. As AI becomes even more sophisticated, more integrated into our lives, how can we ensure that these ethical values, accountability, transparency, explainability, usability, aren't just nice ideas, but are actually baked into the design and development of all AI systems?
That's a big question, and one that I think we're all going to be grappling with for a long time to come.
We are. But if we can approach it with a commitment to these core values, I'm optimistic that we can create an AI-powered future that benefits everyone.
I like that optimism. And on that note, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep pushing for a future where AI truly works for everyone.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's kind of like, we were talking about accountability and transparency, but then if you can't actually understand how the AI works, how can you really hold it accountable?
Yeah, good point. So explainability is kind of the bridge between those other two, right? It's like you can have all the transparency in the world, but if it's not explainable, it's not really usable.
Exactly. And that's especially important in areas where the stakes are high. Like the paper talks about AI being used for medical diagnosis.
Yeah, that's one that always kind of freaks me out. Like, what if the AI tells me I need surgery, but the doctor can't explain why?
Exactly. That's a perfect example of why explainability is so crucial. It's not just about, blindly trusting the AI. It's about doctors and patients having enough information to actually make informed decisions together. So the paper talks about how these systems should be able to provide clear explanations for their recommendations, ideally in plain language, not just like technical jargon.
Yeah, because most of us aren't data scientists, right?
Right. And, that kind of leads into the last value, which is usability.
Right, usability, because even if an AI system is perfectly ethical and transparent and explainable, if it's a pain to use, nobody's going to use it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It has to be user-friendly, it has to be intuitive, it has to be accessible to everyone, regardless of their tech skills.
Makes sense. Like, think about those personal finance apps that use AI. If I'm going to trust an AI to help me manage my money, it better be easy to use, you know? I don't want to have to, read a manual just to figure out how to check my balance.
Totally. So the paper talks about, natural language processing being super important so you can actually talk to the AI, and personalized interfaces, adaptable communication styles, basically making it feel more like a helpful assistant than a scary robot.
Okay, so we've got these 4 values: accountability, transparency, explainability, and usability. They all sound really important. But how do they actually play out in the real world? The paper mentions this concept of algorithmic contestability.
Yeah, it's a big one. So, we were talking earlier about how individuals should have the right to appeal decisions made by AI. But it's not just about having that right. It's also about knowing how to actually exercise that, right?
That's a good point. It's not enough to just say, hey, I don't like what this algorithm did to me. You have to be able to articulate why you're challenging the decision, which means you need some level of understanding of how the algorithm works in the first place.
Exactly. And that can be tricky.
Mm.
It's not always easy to understand how these algorithms work, even for the people who build them sometimes.
It really makes you think about the role of education in all of this. If we're going to live in a world where AI is making more and more decisions that affect our lives, don't we need to equip people with the tools to understand and challenge those decisions?
Absolutely. We need way more AI literacy, not just technical skills, but also critical thinking, Being able to spot biases, think through the ethical implications. It should be like a core part of education, like right up there with reading and math.
Totally agree. Because this isn't just a tech issue, it's a societal issue.
100%. It's about our values, our priorities, like what kind of world do we want to live in?
A world where the machines are making all the decisions. I hope not.
Hopefully not. But that's why these conversations are so important, right? We have to start thinking about these things now, before it's too late.
It's funny. I bet most people don't even realize how much AI they're already interacting with on a daily basis.
Probably not. It's kind of become this invisible force that's shaping so much of our lives.
Yeah.
Like all those personalized recommendations you get online, that's AI.
Oh, yeah. It's everywhere. Even those chatbots you run into on customer service websites. AI's been around longer than I realized.
Right. And think about social media. The algorithms that curate your feed, decide what news you see, that's all AI too.
It's scary to think about, like, who's choosing what we see and don't see.
It's a big question. And it highlights why transparency and accountability are so important in these systems.
Because if we don't know how those decisions are being made, we can't really know if they're fair or not, right?
Exactly.
Honestly, it's a little overwhelming to think about how fast this technology is developing. It feels like we're always playing catch up, Like, just when we figure out how to address one set of ethical concerns, AI has already evolved 3 steps ahead of us.
I know what you mean. I
Uh-huh.
definitely feel that way. But, I'm also optimistic. I think there's growing awareness of these issues both within the tech industry and among the general public. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, at least we're having these conversations, right?
We are. And that's a good sign. It shows that people are starting to realize that this isn't just some abstract, futuristic problem. It's something that's happening now, and it's something that we all have a stake in.
Absolutely. And what really resonates with me from all this is that ethical AI isn't just about, like, coding and algorithms. It's about us. It's about human values, about what we care about as a society.
Couldn't agree more. It's about taking responsibility for the technology we create.
Because ultimately, technology is just a tool, right?
It is. And it's up to us to decide how we use it.
And if we want to create a world where AI benefits everyone, then we need to make sure those ethical values are baked into the very foundation of these technologies.
100%. And that starts with awareness, with education, with having these tough conversations.
So for our listener out there who's been with us on this deep dive so far, what can they do? Like, how can they actually help shape this future of ethical AI we're talking about?
Honestly, they've already taken a big step just by engaging with this research, just by listening to this conversation. Knowledge is power, right?
Mm.
The more we understand about how AI works and what the potential risks are, the better equipped we are to make informed choices.
That's true. But what about beyond just, reading and learning? What are some things people can actually do to make a difference?
Well, first of all, don't be afraid to ask questions. Like if you see a company using AI in a way that seems kind of sketchy or raises some ethical red flags, speak up. Demand more transparency. You have a voice, use it.
So it's about being an informed consumer, right?
Yeah.
Voting with our wallets and our voices.
Exactly. And,
Yeah.
It's important to remember that AI isn't this like unstoppable force that we have no control over.
Okay.
It's a tool, it's built by people, and we have a say in how it's developed and used.
Yeah, I like that. We're not just passive bystanders in all of this.
We're not. And another thing you can do is support organizations that are working to promote ethical AI.
Mm-hmm.
There are tons of groups out there doing really great work, from research institutions to advocacy groups to, even some government agencies that are starting to take this stuff seriously.
That's encouraging to hear. It's nice to know there are people out there fighting the good fight.
Oh, there are a lot of us.
Yeah.
And hey, don't underestimate the power of just talking about these issues with your friends and family.
Yeah.
The more we bring these conversations into the mainstream, the more likely we are to actually see some real change happen.
It's like that old saying, right? The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing.
That's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
And, in this case, doing something can be as simple as having a conversation, spreading awareness, encouraging critical thinking. It all makes a difference.
It's about creating a culture where we don't just blindly accept new technology, but we really engage with it thoughtfully and ask those tough questions, right?
Exactly. And, to kind of bring this all together, I want to leave our listener with a thought-provoking question, inspired by the conclusion of that research paper we've been talking about. As AI becomes even more sophisticated, even more intertwined with our lives, how can we ensure that these ethical values, accountability, transparency, explainability, usability, aren't just like nice ideas, but are actually embedded in the DNA of all AI systems?
That is a big question, and I think it's one that we're all going to be grappling with for a long time to come.
We are, but I'm hopeful. If we approach this challenge with a commitment to these core values, I really believe we can create a future where AI is a force for good in the world.
I like that optimism. And on that note, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into AI ethics. It's been a really thought-provoking conversation, and I hope it's given our listeners some food for thought. And remember, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep pushing for a future where AI works for everyone.
Thanks for having me. It's been a great conversation.